Welcome to our program, Asia in Focus, ESG Investing and the Business of Human Rights Agenda. My name is Sean Lees, and I work for the United Nations Development Program in Asia Pacific. In partnership with the European Union, our Asia in Focus program explores the intersection between business, human rights, and the environment. For today's episode, we're in Malaysia. We'll be launching our new ESG investment report and speaking to experts about the role of ESG investing to drive human rights and environmental performance. Behind me here, on the streets of Kuala Lumpur, is a mural that goes to the heart of the business human rights agenda. It's an image that speaks to the values of human dignity, self-respect, the duty of care we owe one another. Indeed, these are the values that should be driving ESG investing. But questions have been raised about the integrity and effectiveness of this investment approach. Can market-based solutions, such as sustainable finance, incentivize responsible business conduct? Or is ESG investing an unwelcome distraction? Please join us for an illuminating discussion. Today, we talk to experts working in sustainable finance to understand its potential to improve the human rights and environmental performance of companies in Asia. Later in the program, we'll feature special reports spotlighting Malaysia's efforts to promote ESG integration. But before we delve into our discussion, please remember to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on all our future Asian-focused programs. Take a moment, too, to download our report on ESG investing and the business and human rights agenda. The report deep dives into the issues we covered today and provides recommendations for policymakers and business leaders. Our first guest is Eugene Wong, the Chief Executive Officer for Sustainable Finance Institute Asia. And joining him is Ghislaine Nadaud, who is the Senior Sustainability Investing Specialist at Robeco. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Eugene, let's start with you. ESG investing can mean different things to different people. How do you define it?
Well, that's a really fundamental question, Sean. So for me, ESG investing is an approach where we take into consideration sustainability and socially responsible factors when making an investment. I think ESG investing is just a placeholder because right now we are seeing a lot of action and demands for more socially responsible behavior, as well as sustainability being put into all our investment decisions. We see climate change, we see the impact of social inequality, we see the impacts of the deterioration of our environment. Everyone's demanding and clamoring for more responsible behavior. In the future, all investing will naturally incorporate sustainability and socially responsible behavior, and we won't need to have ESG investing anymore.
But fairly or not, there are some industries in Asia that have been in the press lately about poor corporate behavior, poor human rights and environmental performance. I take it you're a believer in the power of ESG investing to make things better. What gives you that optimism?
The power of capital, Sean. As you know, capital is the lifeblood of businesses and economies. And this gives capital providers the opportunity to create awareness, shape behavior, and shift paradigms. But of course, it's not enough for just the providers of capital to do this. They need to be enabled. To enable them, we need things like common languages so that the users of capital will also understand what's required of them. We need things like disclosures to promote stakeholder accountability and inform investment decision making.
And having a common definition also helps to sharpen where the investment goes, I take it. Helps to make sure that people making the investment feel some credibility that their money is being used in the right way.
Yes, that's absolutely important because we need to be speaking the same language now. Sustainable finance is still relatively new, and there are many different perspective aspects and nuances which we have to account for.
And you've been working on a taxonomy that's specific to Southeast Asia for some time now. Why is it important to have a specific Southeast Asian taxonomy around ESG?
Well, firstly, I think all taxonomies are important, right? Because taxonomies actually help provide that common language, as I mentioned just now. It's like going around the world, ordering a latte or an Americano and getting the same thing.
Yeah.
Because if we didn't define what a latte was or what an Americano was, and you can say, oh, black coffee, coffee with milk, there may be different proportions, there may be different strengths in the coffee, but defining it makes ordering coffee the same everywhere in the world.
Okay.
And it's the same with investing. By having a taxonomy, investors understand that they're investing in what's being promised.
So why do we need it then for Southeast Asia,
Right.
though?
So Southeast Asia is different, right? Everything has to be contextualized because If you look at Southeast Asia, our GDP per capita per annum average is 5,400. In the EU, it's 37,500. And the country with the lowest GDP per capita per annum in Southeast Asia is 1,100. The highest is maybe 2,500. So we need to make sure that we actually provide the right frame for investing, because you simply can't use the taxonomy for developed region for developing and emerging countries. That simply will cause a misallocation. Let me give you another example. If you look at coal and the use of coal in Southeast Asia, in Southeast Asia, our coal plants, on average, 38% of them are actually less than 8 years old. In Asia, the coal plants on average are 15 years old, but in Europe, they're 35 years old. So many of the coal plants in Southeast Asia and Asia actually are economically locked in because they're concessions. It is very hard to get rid of them. It's much easier to get rid of them in the EU. What we also have to do is look for different ways to phase out of coal. So in Europe, it's easy. Let's get some renewables out there. But in Southeast Asia, we have to start phasing out of coal. So the ASEAN taxonomy, for instance, includes a criteria for coal phase out where you can finance the phasing out of a coal plant.
Now, I know, Eugene, from many talks with you, that ESG investing and the work you're doing on taxonomy is not just an intellectual exercise. You believe wholeheartedly in its promise. But is there a danger, too, that the attention on ESG investing might lead people to believe that market-based solutions alone are the solution to the many human rights and environmental challenges facing Asia?
Market-based solutions are an extremely important avenue for us. But again, market-based solutions cannot be left on their own. The market cannot be left on it. So we've seen all these various instances where we've left things to the market and we've had very perverse effects. Market forces work best together with government and regulatory forces and resolve, as well as self-discipline as companies and businesses realize that they have to embark on this journey. So it's important for us to also understand that from a global and regional perspective, there must be call to action, and there must be commitments by the governments to that call to action.
But you haven't really emphasized it. In fact, you haven't yet mentioned the role of civil and criminal penalties, whether it be for fraud or for poor corporate behavior. What role do these factors have in moving the needle?
That's an excellent question. I think civil and criminal penalties have a role to play, but again, that needs to be proportionate, because what we want to do is encourage people to actually embark on this journey. So we need to, again, look at the resources people have. We need to look at the understanding. We need to help them build capacity. And we need to promote sustainability through inclusivity, not through exclusion. I'll give you an example. When I was in school, I had classmates who came from very poor backgrounds. So they came to school, they would have to go back, help their parents. They hardly had time to do their homework. They performed poorly. But the teachers held them to the same expectation as the other students. And as a result, many of them actually gave up and they decided to quit school. That would not help them in the long term. It's exactly the same with what we're trying to do with sustainability. Not everyone's going to be able to turn green overnight, to have the best SDG practices overnight. And that is why we need to talk about having a just and orderly transition, which is what we've been trying to do in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, you're also saying in terms of that support and patience, that we're going to need financing for some companies in some contexts to get to where they need to go on their ESG journey. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think sometimes when we talk about ESG investing, we tend to look historically, that's what they've done. But if we want to promote action into the future, we need to look at forward movements.
Ghislaine, let's pick up where Eugene has left off. You've been known to knock on the doors of big companies to get them to change their human rights and environmental performance. Tell me, how successful have you been in your engagement strategy?
Thank you, Sean. And it is indeed true. As an active asset manager, you have various ways to use your influence to improve the performance of companies on human rights and the environment. And one of the ways is engagement. So maybe let me first explain our engagement process.
Yes.
So the first step that we take is that we identify a relevant financial material ESG theme. And we do that by the sustainability team in Asia, for example, in collaboration and in consultation with our investment teams, external stakeholders, and also our clients. One of the themes that we identified last year is the just transition in emerging markets. So then we have identified the theme. The next step that we take is we start our research and we identify engagement objectives. So specific asks for the company that we engage with.
What are some of those specific asks that you make for the companies?
So if we come back to the just transition in emerging markets, we identified 5 engagement objectives. First of all, the company should have a just transition ambition and governance in place. So this means that the board should have the oversight of the just transition activities, implementation. Secondly, stakeholder engagement, specifically focusing on stakeholders that can be impacted by the just transition or by the transition activities. So workers, communities, but also the supply chain that is related to the sector.
And those companies are actually responding and they're coming up with these new policies. They're developing engagement strategies when you go and visit them and have these discussions?
So we started this engagement last year, so we're still at the beginning phase, but all the companies that we are engaging with from the energy and the mining sector have been responsive. So that is already a positive sign. They underline the importance of just transition, but we really see that, for example, on stakeholder engagement, workers, communities, that's common that companies address that, but really assessing what is the impact as well on the supply chain, potential impacts on indigenous peoples, for example, that are areas for improvement.
Now, outside of the renewable energy space, are there other subjects that you're addressing, and do you get a different kind of response from the companies?
So we address in our engagement program, we address the E, the S, and the G. So we have engagement programs specifically on climate change, biodiversity as well. Corporate governance is also an important topic, especially as well in Asia. But I think you can, it remains challenging to address the S in the ESG. One example that is a challenging topic to discuss might be human rights in conflict-affected areas. And unfortunately, we see, of course, in the world, the current stage, we see more conflict areas, and that remains quite a bit of challenge to discuss.
In conflict-affected areas, does Robeco go to a company by itself, or do you bring others along with you in that discussion?
So I think in general, it's important to collaborate with other financial institutions, investors, or even banks in your engagement, because engagement is all about increasing influence. So if you are with more, you have a more influence. So on these difficult topics, it might be very helpful to collaborate with other investors.
And so far, you've described a very robust, forward-leaning ESG investing community. But indeed, if we look at the numbers in Asia, I think the region accounts for only 3% of a $40 trillion global total. What accounts for such a low starting point? Why are we only at 3% of total value on ESG in Asia?
Well, the numbers might be small, but what we really see is that it's an increasing number, especially in Asia. For example, Morgan Stanley report earlier this year identified that the increase in sustainable funds was the highest in Asia, so 7.5%, compared with the US 6% and Europe 5.5%. And it's also not so strange, I think, because we see, first of all, a lot of regulatory developments, regulatory push, you could say, to increase ESG investing in Asia, and we see it in all the countries in Asia. And then, of course, secondly, we have the transition is really happening in Asia. Asia accounts for half of global emissions. 60% of the global population is in Asia, and there's an 80% fossil fuel demand. So the transition is important. The battle against net zero is won or lost in Asia, and that comes with a lot of opportunities. Again, important as well that the transition happens in a fair and inclusive way, and that's why the just transition is so important.
Can you tell us what ESG ratings are, why they're important to institutional investors, but also retail investors like myself? Do we trust ESG ratings?
So ESG ratings, they tell you something about what are the ESG factors that can impact the profitability of a company. So what ESG factors are financial material to a company. The challenge that we have is we have various ESG rating providers in place, and they use their own methodology, they use their own metrics, and that can lead to different outcomes. So that is quite a challenge. First challenge. Another issue is what do they measure? So they measure the financial impact, but do they really measure the sustainability impact of a company? That is actually not the case. If you look at, for example, a tobacco company, they can have a very good ESG rating score because they have all the policies in place, they have a commitment in place to be net zero, for example, but they have a negative impact on the sustainable development goals, on health, for example. So that's why, for example, at Robeco, we developed a score that measures the impact of companies on the sustainable development goals.
The SDGs.
The SDGs, indeed. And that gives you more information on the performance on sustainability. And in line with SDG 17 on partnerships, we also have made these scores public it's all published on our website since last year. And that is also to create a level playing field, you could say.
Well, thank you, Ghislaine, and thank you, Eugene, for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
The Malaysian government is taking big steps in promoting ESG investing in the country, but tightening international standards are forcing Malaysian business leaders to work overtime to keep up with expectations. In this special report, we'll talk to Nadaud Banerjee and Navina Balasingam to better understand potential pathways to greater ESG integration.
Malaysia is a top-tier destination for global investors and corporations, having attracted nearly $40 billion in foreign investment in 2022 with its export-oriented economy. Serving as a vital gateway to Southeast Asia markets, Malaysia continues to draw significant global interest. Recognizing the importance of ESG investment for fostering long-term economic resilience and social responsibility, Malaysia is well positioned to lead the next wave of sustainable growth.
Malaysia is a mega biodiverse country, so it has the potential for many unique nature-based solutions. It can be a showcase for sustainable development. The challenge is that the supply chains are long. Companies don't have a lot of plant and machinery here, so they rely on small producers, what we call micro, small and medium enterprises, who are supplying to large corporations. And these small and medium enterprises, they don't really have the financial heft to change their production lines, to change their labor practices, not easily, unless some parent company helps them out or the government helps them out.
UNDP, therefore, works with the government of Malaysia and partners to sensitize their staff on sustainable development and ESG. At the policy level, UNDP provides technical support to the government in the development of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, the National Policy on Biological Diversity, as well as a number of sustainability initiatives.
UNDP also does a little more on the technical side. We have gone out and mapped about 15 areas, 15 different industries, where you can make a profit, but also where you can make profit in a sustainable, socially responsible, good governance way. This is called the Investor Map for Malaysia.
The SDG Investor Mapping was an exercise that was carried out by the UNDP last year, where they worked with many different government and private sector stakeholders to identify investment opportunities in sustainable or green projects in Malaysia and particular sectors that were attractive for investments.
So the Securities Commission is the capital market regulator in Malaysia, and the SC, as we're widely known, set up Capital Markets Malaysia in 2014. So our role is to promote market development of our capital market intermediaries, and we also provide capacity building, particularly in the area of ESG. We then have the Center for Sustainable Corporations, which was set up initially to focus on supporting capacity building and developing ESG practices amongst our public listed companies. And then more recently, we've also included small to medium enterprises in the mix, and we've begun to support them in setting a sustainability strategy and to start reporting on their on ESG disclosures. Because we understand that in order to help public listed companies, we must also help their supply chains to adopt ESG. So we've run many programs in the last 2 years to support SMEs on their sustainability journey. Capital Markets Malaysia is really fortunate to be a member of the UNDP-led Financial Centres for Sustainability, or FC4S. We've been a member for a few years now, and what that helps us with is we have an ability to benchmark how Malaysia as a country is performing in the advancement of sustainable finance, sustainable investing, and corporate ESG.
Because all of this actually at the end of the day counts. People will pay their staff better. People will not abuse migrant labor. People will not throw chemical waste into the drain and hope it will go away. So it's a slow process, but it's happening. And I have to be very clear, it's not UNDP alone that's making the difference. There are many actors in government, outside government, in semi-government, regulators, Bank Negara, Bursa. So it's many are working together in tandem.
I trust you found our special report engaging. A big thank you to our Malaysia team for sharing insights into the country's journey towards ESG integration. Next on Asian Focus, we have in the studio Elizabeth Wu, legal consultant for ClientEarth, and Luanne Sieh, Group Chief Sustainability Officer from CIMB. Welcome to you both. Elizabeth, let's start with you. At ClientEarth, among other things, you work with institutional investors, investor groups on preventing greenwashing. How big of a problem is that in Asia?
Well, greenwashing is definitely a challenge to the net zero transition in Asia. It's also definitely on the radars of regulators. There's a general move towards increased transparency and disclosure in Asia. A number of Asian jurisdictions have already implemented mandatory sustainability reporting for listed issuers, and the next evolution of that would be mandatory reporting for non-listed companies.
We are hearing that this tightening of the regulatory environment, though, might be leading some companies to reduce their ambition, at least public statements on their ambitions with regards to carbon emission reductions, etc. Is there real fear of green hushing in Asia? And tell us a little bit more about what green hushing is.
So green hushing is the phenomenon of companies lowering their climate ambitions or potentially not fully communicating their climate ambitions because they're worried of being accused of greenwashing. Alongside stringent disclosure, it would be important to have regulations which require companies to implement net zero transition plans to ensure that their ambition doesn't get watered down. I think legal capacity building and understanding the legal risks associated with both greenwashing as well as green hushing is important. ClientEarth has done some work on this and put out a guide on greenwashing. So ultimately, these are issues which need to be addressed for the net zero transition in Asia.
But are legal risks, in fact, that present? What role does civil and criminal prosecution have in Asia?
Well, definitely penalties, definitely types of regulatory legislation that are against, say, greenwashing, sends a very strong message that greenwashing and even green hushing in time is not something that would be helpful for the net zero transition. In Korea, it's one of the first jurisdictions to actually pass a law against greenwashing. So companies can actually be fined if they make misleading statements. There's also been activity in Singapore. The Advertising Standards Authority has, for the first time, found that a particular advertisement constituted greenwashing because it made misleading energy savings claims. Separately, there's also been legal action regarding greenwashing. So one of the landmark cases was brought by a South Korean advocacy group against a South Korean oil company. The oil company had made statements that it could produce carbon dioxide-free liquefied natural gas. And so the advocacy group made a legal complaint. The South Korean Environment Ministry issued a warning to the company, and the company retracted this claim.
Is that as tough as it gets, though? Warnings, a threat of penalty, request to remove statements? Or are we seeing penalties that actually hurt the bottom line of these companies?
Well, in the case of the penalties in the South Korean legislation, the actual quantum of the fine, I believe, is not exactly very high. But the fact that these penalties, these types of regulatory action is even occurring, I think sends a very strong signal. It also affects the company's reputation, I think, to be embroiled, to receive such warnings from regulators. And so this is, I think, the kind of scrutiny and the kind of importance that we need to place on these issues to start moving towards net zero transition faster.
What about shareholder resolutions? Are shareholders bringing senior management to account for their climate ambitions?
Well, in Asia, there is an uptick on shareholder climate resolutions, but not as much as the rest of the world. There could be some reasons for this. The first is potentially in Asia a preference for private engagement. So,
What do you mean by private engagement?
Yeah, so private engagement in the form of, let's say, confidential discussions between the investor and a company, or investor roundtables, several investors that are communicating with a company. And this is in contrast to shareholder resolutions, which are publicly brought. Another reason could also be because filing thresholds for shareholder resolutions vary in different jurisdictions. Basically, the proportion of resolutions, the proportion of shareholdings that's necessary to bring a resolution can differ from country to country. So ClientEarth has put out a guide on the landscape for this in 11 Asian jurisdictions. And we find that in jurisdictions with a lower filing threshold that's required, then that would create potentially a better ecosystem. An example of this is Japan, which has a fairly low threshold to file a shareholder resolution. And there is quite a lot of activity with respect to shareholder climate resolution in Japan.
Now, tell me, but for the rest of Asia, is that shareholder resolution threshold very high then?
It varies from country to country. So it really depends on the particular ecosystem of that particular country.
Tell me a little bit about the investment strategies of large financial institutions in Asia. Are they aligning their investment strategies with climate goals?
So investment strategies are not fully aligned with climate goals. There is definitely a gap between ambition as well as compared with on-the-ground implementation. It would be helpful, I believe, to have a very clear regulatory and legislative roadmaps so that this creates certainty and stability so that private investment can flow towards the net zero transition. So looking domestically, that could entail having framework climate legislation that would govern the different areas within a particular country that relate to the net zero transition. Associated with that, a robust national energy plan, and this based on credible science-based targets, as well as sector-specific guidance, which gives a framework for different institutions, different firms, businesses to understand exactly what they need to do with respect to the transition.
You're talking about a lot of top-down approaches, regulations, guidance from the state and or industry bodies. A lot of it seems to be top-down to me. Is there not a need and or is there not a movement for bottom-up approaches where customers, clients, shareholders, others are actually demanding that companies, large companies in particular, do more with regards to their climate impacts?
So I see it as an interactive process. So there's a certain extent to which regulation sets the tone for a particular country. And international frameworks also set a tone for a particular region. So, for example, on the multilateral front, on the international cooperation, if there could be greater coordination on managed coal phase-out across Asia, climate-aligned investment in trade law levers that support investment in renewable energy. All of this creates an ecosystem kind of at the regional level, the Asia-wide level, as well as in the domestic level, for then bottom-up approaches to change, to mature. And so it's very much an interactive process. But the mindset needs to change also, ultimately. And this means different entities, businesses, institutions need to look at climate ambition and sustainable development, not as business risks, not as increasing potential liability, but creating greater opportunities for growth, creating greater competitiveness, greater market advantages, and basically looking at this as working towards the same goal ultimately.
Let's pick up with this idea of the mindset shift that's needed with Luanne. Luanne, tell me, are we seeing more Asian investors and or just clients from yours demanding that your bank do more to lend to companies that are ESG compliant?
It's funny you brought up investors, because it was through conversations with our global investors that started us on our ESG journey at CIMB. And this was back in 2017, 2018. In 2018, 2019, when we first started, mapping up our strategies on sustainability, we had people giving me quizzical looks about why a bank is looking at sustainability, because that's not part of our business. Fast forward to 2024, we've seen a huge shift in the mindset, where, there was initially a lot of resistance, a lot of questioning. There is now not just support, but in fact, expectation for banks and for companies to be responsible in whatever business activity that they're doing.
Because bank lending in particular gives a lot of leverage to the bank to promote ESG compliance. In your opinion, are banks in the region doing enough? Are they using their leverage to the maximum potential?
Taking a step back, I would say that no company, no industry, no country is doing enough to influence the net zero transition. I think everyone needs to do more. However, for banking, there are a number of ways that we can influence our clients. First, and the most important really, to start off with, is to ensure that our clients are not using our funds to do activities that are very harmful to the environment or to people. Things like deforestation, things like human rights violations. On the other end of the spectrum, we have incentives to encourage our clients to do good things. So, for example, put in place green projects, like green buildings, or to increase their adaptation activities and resilience to climate change. Now, in the middle, that is where there is a huge shift that requires to be focused on, because there are many companies that are starting to think about climate change, starting to think about this, but really haven't done very much.
Are you at risk of losing some of your best clients or long-term clients if you insist on too much? What do you do when you're in those circumstances? How do you mitigate that risk?
You bring up a really, really good point, because if any one bank tries to put in place really tough policies on their clients, and because don't forget, a bank is in competition with other banks to get clients. So if any bank has a very strict policy, clients can very easily just then go to another bank who may not have as stringent environmental requirements. So it's really important that, that there is no single hero bank, but really that the industry moves together, especially to limit the really egregious harm that they could be facilitating through their finance.
What is keeping the banking industry from really coming together and moving as one and moving fast?
I must say that there's already been a lot of acceleration in the last few years. Most banks have already put out their climate targets. Many are talking about net zero. However, I feel that the one thing that would really accelerate the transition and the adoption is government policy on net zero and things like a price on carbon, because a carbon price would really incentivize and align clients, businesses and individuals to take climate action, because if they don't, that hits their wallet.
We've had other conversations where you said what's also needed is greater engagement with civil society organizations. Can you speak to that more? What's the status of civil society organizations today? How are they helpful? How are they not helpful to moving the banking industry forward?
I must say that civil society action in Southeast Asia, as far as I've seen, has not been as strong as in other regions. And I think that, in fact, has put us at a disadvantage because there is less conversation, less awareness, but also less impetus for companies to change. So we speak to civil society on a regular basis. Of course, some of them are quite scary, so with caution, but many of them do help us a lot. They show us what good looks like. They show us, and in no uncertain terms, what they think should happen. And that sends a very strong message to our management and to our boards. And that really helps to drive action internally.
Other people said, we're never going to get to where we need to go unless we bring on small and medium-sized enterprises. Do you agree? And if so, what needs to be done?
Absolutely. SMEs play a huge role in the Southeast Asian economy. And, unfortunately, through the COVID cycle, many of them are still struggling to stay on their feet. However, I must say that COVID has also brought the awareness that long-term planning and resilience and risk management is really important. So we're starting to see more SMEs become more aware. The regulations, unfortunately, on things like climate disclosures are still very much on listed companies, and that is still relatively new outside of Singapore. But we're starting to see more awareness. However, that really needs to be accelerated. CIMB has a program called Green Biz Ready, where we give free consulting to our SME clients to help them bring them up that curve. And we include things like carbon calculators, incentives on their financing, etc. So there's a lot to be done, and everything that we're doing, I guess, helps a little bit.
Well, thank you, Luanne, and thank you, Elizabeth, for being here today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So great to be here.
Thank you. And that concludes our program, Asia in Focus, ESG Investing and the Business and Human Rights Agenda. We hope you'll download our report for an even deeper understanding of the potential of sustainable finance in the region. To stay updated on future episodes of Asia in Focus, please subscribe to UNDP's YouTube channel. Thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye.